Hello everyone, this is part 3 on how to make a racing game in Scratch. In this tutorial, I will be adding a better looking lap counter, improving the movement of the car, and reorganizing the code of the car to make it more efficient. Anyways, let's get started. So first off, I'm going to make the car go a bit faster because right now the car moves a bit too slowly. So all I have to do is to change the speed here to, let's say 0.7. And I'm going to increase the speed a bit if the car's touching the grass to maybe 0.3. Alright, let's try it out. So now the car moves much faster, so it's a bit harder to control, which I want. And I might make the car rotate a bit slower, actually. So if I go down here, I'm going to maybe make the car turn 30 degrees. So, yep. And now the car should turn much slower. And this way, the car is much more harder to control, which makes the game a bit harder. So, yeah. Alright. And now that I made these small adjustments to the car, I am going to improve this lap counter right here, because right now it's just the default Scratch variable. So I'm going to create an actual lap counter by creating a new sprite. And I'm just going to simply type in here lap and then 1. And I'm going to center this, so right around here, I think. Alright, then I'm going to right click, duplicate, and then change this to lap 2 and lap 3. So since my racetrack here is pretty large, I'm just going to have 3 laps. So that should be fine. And I'm actually going to name these costumes 1, 2, and 3. This way it's easier to switch the costumes, which I will do right now. So to switch the costumes based on the current lap variable, we just grab a when flag clicked, then in a forever loop, let's just switch costume to the current lap variable. So drag this lap inside of here, and this should be fine. So I'm going to first reposition this to the top left corner, which is right here. Alright, so I'll go to this position, and I might make this a bit larger, so I'll set the size to maybe 200%. Okay. Okay, maybe a bit smaller, so 150. Alright. So X position -179, Y position 149. Alright. And set size to 150%. Alright, so let's try it out. So right now it's lap 1. And let's just go through this entire racetrack once to see if the lap changes. So let's see. And as you can see, the car is actually much harder to control because it turns more slowly and it moves more fast. Alright. And this track is pretty large, so it's going to take a while. But I think we're about halfway there. Oh, and there we go. So now it's lap 2, as you can see, and it works. And now we have our custom lap counter finished, which was actually pretty easy. So now I can hide the lap variable, and that should be fine. And by the way, don't mind the YouTube logo. I just added that whenever I click the stop button. But anyways, yeah. So now I might make some changes to the race car, because right now, when I press the up arrow key, the car instantly reaches its maximum speed, like this. I can show you with the speed variable. Oops. Okay, let me just first make this go to the front. So I'm just going to add a go to front in the starting point of the racetrack. Alright. So anyways, as you can see, since our speed variable is constant, whenever we press the up arrow key, the car moves forward based on this speed variable, which is a constant amount. So as you can see, there is no acceleration to the car. However, I want some acceleration to the car because that just makes it a bit more of a racing type game sort of feel. And I think with acceleration, it makes the game much more interesting and fun to play. So anyways, let's do that. So first off, we're going to keep our speed variable, of course. However, we're going to have to create two new variables. One called acceleration. Then click OK. And one called maximum speed. So I'll just call it max speed. Alright. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to change the speed based on its acceleration, so that makes the speed constantly go up. However, once the speed is greater than its maximum speed, then the speed's just going to stay that value. So to do so, I'm going to grab an if statement and check if the speed is less than the maximum speed. So if the speed is less than max speed, then I'm going to change speed by acceleration. So our acceleration is going to be a certain number, and then we're going to change or increase our speed based on its acceleration. So let's put this inside of the if key up arrow pressed, and also duplicate this, and put it inside of the if key down arrow pressed. Alright, so now we also need to set the acceleration to a certain value in order to make this work. So after the when flag clicked, I'm gonna set the acceleration to a certain number. Let's say maybe 0.05. And I'm also gonna set the maximum speed to a certain number. Let's say 0.7. Because the car's current speed is 0.7 in here. Alright. And for now, let's take out the if touching color green, this part, because otherwise this won't work. So let's try it out for now. Okay. The car seems to still not accelerate, so let's see. Oh yeah, that's because our speed, as you can see, is already 0.7. And we have to set our speed to 0 when the flag is clicked. So let's do that. And let's try it again. So as you can see, our speed is 0. And when we accelerate, our speed slowly increases. Alright, let's try it again. So 0, and then it slowly increases to 0.7. So as you can see, there is some acceleration. However, now our car slows down, but our speed doesn't slow down. So let's fix that by going down here. And as the same with our x velocity and y velocity, let's set our speed to the speed times 0.93. So let's copy this and replace the x velocity or whatever you copied with speed and put that back in. Now if we try it, our speed should decrease like that. And you might notice that our speed does not reach 0.7, which is our max speed, but that's fine. The speed doesn't reach 0.7 because we set our speed to speed times 0.93. So our max speed isn't actually 0.7, it's a bit less, but it's not that big of a deal, so let's just leave it like that. And now, I think I'm going to create a new variable to replace these numbers, since these numbers are the exact same. So let's create a new variable, and I'll name this deceleration multiplier. Alright, click OK. And what this is going to do is that I'm going to set it to 0.93, which is the value here, and then drag this variable inside all of these. This way, in the future, if I ever want to increase or decrease the deceleration multiplier, I can just do it in one place instead of manually changing the values in all of these three bubbles. Alright, so let's do that. I'm going to first set the deceleration multiplier to 0.93 when the flag is clicked. And then I'm going to drag the variable inside all of these bubbles. And now the game should work the exact same as before. And it does. Alright. So now another thing I noticed was that if the car goes forwards and then backwards, the car doesn't take time to decelerate because the car's backward speed is the exact same as the speed shown in the variable right here. So what this should do is that the car, if it's like moving at maximum speed, if the car goes backwards, the car should slowly go backwards instead of immediately going backwards like this. So to make the car also slowly increase speed while going backwards, we have to change the speed by acceleration times -1. So times -1, and then put the acceleration inside of here, and then put it back. And then we actually don't need the -1 in here. So let's just take out the -1. All right. And this should be fine. So let's try it out. So as you can see, if we're going backwards, then our speed becomes negative. So this way the race car decelerates and goes slower when you shift from going forwards to going backwards. So like this to going slower and then going at max speed backwards. Alright, it looks good. So now I think I'm going to reorganize this code a bit because it's pretty messy, and also I need to add this back in. So I'm going to first create a new block. So let's go to my blocks over here and then create a block, and I'm going to call this update speeds, update speed and positions. Alright, and I'm just going to drag all of this inside of here and then put this block under here. So doing this is the exact same as just doing this, like this. However, it just saves us a bit of space because we can move this somewhere else, like down here or something. And then our main code of the car right here is just this plus the block. So yeah, it just saves a bit of space, makes the code a bit easier to manage. So yeah, now I want to add this back in because right now for the race car, if it's going on the grass, its speed does not change at all. So the car does not slow down or anything. So we have to add this back in, and to do so, we can't just directly drag this back in because our speed is now always changing. And if we drag this back in, then it's just going to set our speed to a constant number, like 0.7 or 0.3. And that would make the acceleration not work. So what I'm going to do is that I am going to create a new variable and call this speed multiplier. Alright, and our speed multiplier variable is basically going to replace this right here. So if the car is going on the grass, of course the car is going to accelerate slower and also have a lower maximum speed. And since we're only going to change the speed multiplier in here, we're going to have to change our acceleration and max speed by its own values multiplied by the speed multiplier. So to do that, let's just drag these two, set acceleration and set max speed blocks, into the forever loop, in here. And I'm going to grab a multiplication operator and multiply the value by speed multiplier. So 0.05 times speed multiplier for the acceleration, and duplicate, and 0.7 times speed multiplier for the max speed variable. And now, instead of setting the speed if the car is touching the grass, we set it to, or we set the speed multiplier to a certain value. So let's set this to maybe 0.6. And for this one, since we want the normal speed, we set it to 1. And keep in mind that the speed multiplier is a multiplied number for the acceleration and the max speed. So if we set the speed multiplier to 1, that means the car runs at normal speed. However, if we set the speed multiplier to 0.6, that means the car moves at 0.6 times its normal speed, which means that it moves slower. So if we're touching color green, the car should move slower. Else, if the car is touching any color other than green, then it moves at normal speed. Alright, so let's drag this inside of our forever loop in here, and let's try it out. So right now, the car's maximum speed is 0.66 about. However, if it's touching the grass, then the maximum speed is now 0.39. So as you can see, the car moves slower when it's in the grass. Like that. Alright. So now that we have the grass working, I also want the car to move slower when it's traveling backwards, because right now it moves backwards at the same speed as it moves forward. However, I want a smaller speed. So to do that, we can just drag this if else inside of the if up arrow key pressed, and then copy this and put this inside of the if key down arrow pressed. However, we change the speed multiplier to a lower number. So let's say if it's touching the grass, then we change it to, or we set it to 0.3. Else, let's just set it to 0.5. So now if the down arrow key is pressed, then the car should move half as slow because our speed multiplier is 0.5. However, if the up arrow key is pressed, then the car still moves at normal speed because the speed multiplier is 1. And the same with the grass. So yeah, let's try it out. If you go forward, then normal speed of 0.66. However, if you move backwards, then the car moves at half speed of 0.33. And in the grass, it should be half speed backwards compared to its normal speed forwards. So yeah, it works. Alright. And now that should be pretty much it with the acceleration of the car. However, I think the code here is a bit too messy. It can definitely be more efficient because the blocks inside of the key up arrow pressed and key down arrow pressed are essentially the same. So let's simplify this by creating a new block. And I will call this maybe move speed or move direction. Or actually, let's see. We're going to have to know which key is being pressed inside of this custom block. So I'm going to name it something like this. So if, and then I'm going to add an input boolean. If, let's say, key pressed, and then I'll say if key pressed, then I'll add a label. By the way, I'll explain all this later. So let's name this if key pressed, then accelerate by, and then I'll add a input, a number or text input, and then I'll call this acceleration. And then I will also need the speed multiplier variable. So I'm going to add another label, speed multiplier, or with speed multiplier. And then lastly, I will add a number or text input, and I'll call this speed multiplier. Alright, now I'll click OK. And now I have this extremely long block. So I'll explain to you what this does. So since we're trying to simplify the if up arrow key pressed and if down arrow key pressed, we have to first check if the up or down arrow key is pressed. Then we're going to accelerate by acceleration, which is a variable that we're going to set its value for, with the speed multiplier of a number that we're going to set its value for. So this may seem a bit confusing at first, but once I finish making the block, it should make much more sense. So first of all, I am going to check in the control if key pressed from our custom block. Then let's see. So in our up arrow key pressed, if the key is pressed, then we first of all change our x velocity and y velocity, right? So let's put this inside of our custom block. So in here. So then we do all of this. And this block is the exact same as the block inside of the if key down arrow pressed. So we don't have to touch this. So now next thing is that we check if the speed is less than the max speed, then we change speed by acceleration. And this should be the same as the down arrow key pressed also. Oh yeah, it's not, because for the down arrow key, it's acceleration times -1. So yeah, that's why we have our acceleration variable inside of our custom block. So let's drag this under the change x velocity and change y velocity. And instead of this acceleration variable, let's replace it with the acceleration variable from the custom block. Alright. And now lastly, there's the if touching color green, then set the speed multiplier. So let's copy this and drag this inside of here. Alright, and this is different for both the up arrow key pressed and down arrow key pressed, because as you can see, the values for the speed multiplier are half of the values of the speed multiplier for the up arrow key. That's because if the car is moving backwards, we want it to move half its speed. So let's see. We're going to have to include our speed multiplier variable from the custom block, but I think we're going to need another variable for the grass. So let's create a new variable, and I'll call this grass speed multiplier. Alright. And I'm going to set this to, let's say, 0.5. Alright, and of course, I am creating a lot of variables, but this will make it so much easier in the long run. So yeah, but anyways, let's say we want our race car to move half its speed in the grass. That's why we have our grass speed multiplier to 0.5. And now what I'm going to do here is that I'm going to set the speed multiplier to speed multiplier variable from our custom block times the grass speed multiplier. Alright, and put this inside of here. And else I am going to set the speed multiplier to the speed multiplier from the custom block and nothing else. Alright, so now that we are done with our custom block, we can now actually use this in our forever loop. And of course, I'll explain this after I'm done. So, now that we have our custom block, we actually don't need these two large blocks anymore. So we don't need the if key up arrow key pressed or the if down arrow key pressed. So we can just take this and then put it back in. And let's set this aside for now. Okay. I'll put it right up here. Alright. So now we want to include this block inside of our forever loop to replace this large chunk. So let's go to my blocks, and then I'm going to drag this inside of the forever loop, and let's fill out this block first of all for the up arrow key pressed. So let's drag this down here, and let's check it out. So if up arrow key pressed, so let's just copy this. So if the up arrow key is pressed, then we want to accelerate by acceleration because it does so right here. So that means this value in here is going to pass down to this value, which is essentially the exact same as just doing this. So accelerate by acceleration. I'll just first copy this back. All right. With speed multiplier of 1. Because if we press the up arrow key, we want the race car to move at its normal speed. And we'll deal with this later. But anyways, this should be fine. And now let's do the same for the down arrow key. So let's go to my blocks, and then drag this long block. And let's check for the down arrow key. I'll first move this up. If the key down arrow is pressed, then we want to accelerate by acceleration times -1. So let's copy this, which pretty much means that the car moves backwards. And then with speed multiplier of 0.5. Because as you can see here, if we go backwards, the car moves at half its speed. Alright, and now that we're done with this, this should work the exact same as this large chunk of code. So now I'll explain how the block works. So let's see. First of all, I'll put this right here. So I'll put it right here. So first we check if the key itself is pressed. So in here we check if the key up arrow key is pressed. Then this right here passes it down to here, right here, which passes it down to here. So this checks if the key is pressed, which is either up arrow or down arrow key is pressed. Then it does all of the stuff in here. So first of all, for changing the x velocity and y velocity, it's the exact same for both the up arrow key and down arrow key. So this, we just leave it like this. And if the key is pressed, then if our speed is less than the max speed, then we can increase the speed of the car. So we change the speed by acceleration. And in this case, if the up arrow key is pressed, then we change it by our normal acceleration variable. However, if the down arrow key is pressed, then we change it by acceleration times -1, because we want it to move backwards. Alright? And therefore, this variable, or these two variables, pass down to this, which pass down to this. Alright, and now with our speed multiplier, this determines how fast we want our car to go and accelerate. So with up arrow key pressed, we want the car to move at its normal speed, which is why we have our speed multiplier set to 1. So this number 1 passes down to here, which passes down to here. So if the car is not touching the color green or the grass, then it sets its speed multiplier to 1, which means that the car moves at normal speed. However, with our grass speed multiplier, if it's touching the grass, then it moves at half speed. Since remember, our grass speed multiplier is set to 0.5 right here. So when the car goes forward and it goes into the grass, it moves at half speed. And now for the backwards. So if the key down arrow is pressed, then it moves with speed multiplier of 0.5. So this value passes down to here, which passes down to here. So since our speed multiplier is 0.5, if the car is not touching the grass, which means that it's on the track, then it moves backwards at half its speed of normal. And if the car is touching the grass and moving backwards, then the car moves at 1/4 its speed compared to normal, because our speed multiplier is 0.5, and then times the grass speed multiplier, which is 0.5, which makes it 0.25. So that's essentially it. And the reason that I added this block and added all of these new variables, such as the grass speed multiplier, is because that it's really easy to change. I'll give you an example right now, but first we can now delete this large chunk of code because we don't need this anymore. So let's drag this and delete it. And now, as you can see, our code is much more clean. We can just put this to the side here, and our main code right here is now much shorter. All of it is just this much. So anyways, it should work the exact same as before. So if I try it out, then okay, it accelerates with speed 0.66. Then if we go backwards, it accelerates at maximum speed of negative 0.33. And then if it's going forward and it goes through the grass, it goes at half speed of 0.33. And then if we go backwards in the grass, then it goes half speed, or 1/4 speed actually, sorry, of negative 0.16. So as you can see, it perfectly works fine. And yeah. So as I was saying before, the reason I made this block and added all these variables is because it's super easy to change. So let's say we actually want the car to move at the same speed backwards as we do forwards. We just simply change the speed multiplier of the if key down arrow key pressed from 0.5 to 1. Now, if the car moves forward, it goes at 0.66. However, if it goes backwards, its max speed is also 0.66, like that. And if we want the car to move really slowly when it goes backwards, we just change this to, let's say, 0.1. So if it goes forwards, still normal speed, 0.66. However, if it goes backwards, its maximum speed is negative 0.06, which is extremely slow, like this. So that's why I added this block. First of all, it's much more convenient, and it's also very easy to change. So let's change this back to 0.5, and that should be fine. And of course, you can play around with the numbers, maybe increase or decrease the acceleration, increase or decrease the max speed, maybe increase the grass speed multiplier or decrease it, and play around with all these numbers. So yeah. Anyways, that's it for this tutorial. If you enjoyed it, then give it a thumbs up and subscribe too, if you haven't already. I have this project shared on my Scratch profile, so if you want to take a look, the link is in the description below. Anyways, that's it for this video. See ya!